The cold metal of the observation deck's railing pressed against Lyra's palms as she stared out at the endless expanse of space. The distant stars twinkled like tiny diamonds against the black void, but their beauty brought her no comfort tonight. As a member of the highly advanced Artaxian species, she had always felt different from her own kind, too emotional, too curious, too imperfect. The space station Harmony 7 had been her home for the past 3 cycles, a bustling hub where various alien species conducted trade and diplomatic relations. Yet despite being surrounded by thousands of beings, Lyra had never felt more alone. Her violet skin, usually glowing with a soft bioluminescence characteristic of her species, had grown dim in recent weeks, a clear sign of her deteriorating emotional state. Her people prided themselves on their logical thinking and technological achievements. Emotions were seen as primitive, unnecessary relics of evolution that needed to be suppressed. But Lyra couldn't suppress them, no matter how hard she tried. The constant pressure to conform, to be the perfect Artaxian, had finally become too much to bear. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, an experimental quantum phase shifter she had stolen from the research lab where she worked. One press of the button would scatter her atoms across multiple dimensions, ending her existence in this reality. Her 3-fingered hand trembled as she held it. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a calm voice spoke from behind her. Lyra spun around, nearly dropping the device. A human stood there, one of the newer species to join the galactic community. He was tall by human standards, with dark skin and kind eyes that seemed to look right through her carefully constructed walls. "This is none of your business," Lyra said, her universal translator converting her musical Artaxian speech into standard galactic common. "You don't understand." The human took a careful step forward, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "My name's Marcus. I'm a maintenance engineer here on Harmony 7. And while I may not understand exactly what you're going through, I recognize that look in your eyes. I've seen it before in the mirror." Something in his voice made Lyra pause. Unlike the cold, analytical tones of her own people, there was warmth there. Understanding. Her grip on the phase shifter loosened slightly. "Your species is considered primitive by many in the galaxy," she said, though there was no malice in her words. "How could you possibly help me?" Marcus smiled gently. "Maybe that's exactly why I can help. We humans might be new to the galactic stage, but we've had a long history of dealing with emotions, both the good and the bad. We've learned that feeling deeply isn't a weakness. It's what makes life worth living." The words struck something deep within Lyra. All her life, she had been told that her emotional nature was a flaw, something to be ashamed of. Yet here was a member of a space-faring race telling her the exact opposite. "Would you like to talk about it?" Marcus asked, gesturing to a nearby bench. "I've got time, and I make a mean cup of coffee, though I had to modify the recipe a bit to make it safe for non-human consumption." For the first time in weeks, Lyra felt the faintest flicker of hope. The glow of her skin brightened ever so slightly as she looked at the strange human who had appeared just when she needed someone most. She looked down at the phase shifter in her hand, then back at Marcus. Making her decision, she slowly placed the device on the ground and stepped away from the railing. I think I would like that," she said quietly. The small cafe tucked away in the quieter section of Harmony 7's recreation deck was almost empty at this late hour. Lyra sat across from Marcus, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of modified coffee. The sweet spicy aroma was unlike anything she had experienced before, and the warmth seemed to seep into her very being. "My father is a leading scientist in quantum mechanics," Lyra began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He expects nothing less than perfection. In our society, showing emotion is seen as primitive. They have medications, treatments, even neuromodifications to suppress what they call emotional irregularities." Marcus listened intently, his own cup of coffee forgotten. The artificial lighting of the station caught the subtle patterns in Lyra's violet skin, a beautiful display of bioluminescence that seemed to pulse with her words. "But I refused the treatments," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I didn't want to become like them, cold, distant, calculating. I thought I could prove that being emotional didn't make me less capable. Instead, I've only proved them right. I failed my latest research project because I became too invested in the potential impact on other species. They say I lack objectivity. That sounds like empathy to me, Marcus said softly. Where I come from, that's considered a strength, not a weakness. Lyra looked up, surprise flickering across her features. Really? But humans are so chaotic. Your histories speak of wars, conflicts, passionate debates. Surely that proves emotions are dangerous? Marcus leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. You know what's interesting about humans? We've been to the brink of destruction several times because of our emotions. But it's also our emotions that saved us. Compassion, love, hope, these feelings drove us to find better ways, to reach for the stars, to make peace with former enemies. He gestured around the cafe. Look at this station. It exists because different species learn to work together, to understand each other. And understanding isn't just about logic, it's about empathy. About feeling what others feel. Lyra's skin brightened slightly as she absorbed his words. But how do you handle it? The intensity of feelings, the way they can overwhelm you? We learn to channel them. Marcus explained. Think of emotions like the plasma flows you work with in your quantum research. Uncontrolled, they can be destructive. But properly channeled, they can power entire cities. Your emotions aren't a flaw, Lyra. They're a power source. For the first time in months, Lyra felt something close to peace. The constant shame and self-doubt that had plagued her began to fade, replaced by a new perspective. Perhaps her flaw wasn't a flaw at all, but rather a gift that her species had forgotten how to value. I've been working on a personal project, she found herself saying. A way to map emotional responses across different species, to find the common threads that connect us all. My supervisors dismissed it as irrelevant, but it could change everything. Marcus finished, his eyes lighting up with interest. That's exactly the kind of research that could help break down barriers between species. As they talked, either of them noticed the subtle changes in the cafe around them. Other late-night visitors, humans, aliens, and everything in between, had begun to pause and listen to their conversation. There was something compelling about the sight of a human and an Artaxian engaged in such an earnest discussion, something that spoke to the very heart of what Harmony 7 was meant to represent. The next few days brought unexpected changes to Lyra's life. Her research lab, once a place of dread, became bearable with her new perspective. She found herself looking forward to her evening conversations with Marcus at the cafe, where they would discuss everything from quantum physics to human poetry. Today, however, was different. Lyra stood frozen in her lab, staring at the message on her screen. Her father was coming to Harmony 7 for an inspection of the research facilities. Her skin dimmed to a pale lavender, almost gray, as anxiety coursed through her. Your emotional instability has gone on long enough. The message read. I have scheduled your neuromodification procedure for the day after my arrival. This is not a request. The lab equipment around her began to blur as tears formed in her large, iridescent eyes, another trait that set her apart from other Artaxians, who rarely showed such physical signs of emotion. She needed to talk to Marcus. She found him in his usual workspace, surrounded by tools and diagnostic equipment. The maintenance bay was cluttered but organized in its own way, much like the human himself. When he saw her distressed state, he immediately put down the device he was repairing. My father is coming, Lyra said, her voice trembling. He wants to force me to undergo the modification procedure. I'll become like them, empty, cold. I can't. I won't. Marcus stood up, his expression serious. Then we won't let that happen. Show me your research, the emotional mapping project you told me about. Lyra blinked in surprise. But it's incomplete. The data. Sometimes the best defense is to show them what they're trying to destroy, Marcus said. You've been mapping emotional responses across species, right? Proving that emotions serve a vital function in development and progress? Over the next few hours, They worked together in Lyra's lab. Marcus's human perspective helped her see patterns in her data she had missed before. His understanding of human history provided countless examples of how emotions had driven scientific breakthroughs and social progress. "Look at this," Lyra said excitedly, her skin now glowing brightly. "The data shows that species with higher emotional intelligence tend to advance faster in certain areas, arts, music, but also problem-solving and adaptation to new situations. Even the Artaxians' greatest achievements came during our pre-suppression era." Marcus grinned. "And your own emotional sensitivity let you see these patterns that others missed. Your flaw made this discovery possible." As they worked, other researchers began to take notice. A young Centaurian scientist stopped to ask questions about their findings. A Regellian data analyst offered to help process their results. Even some of Lyra's Artaxian colleagues showed subtle signs of interest, a raised eyebrow, a lingering glance at their displays. "Your father arrives tomorrow," Marcus said softly as they finished compiling their findings. "Are you ready to stand up for yourself?" Lyra looked at their work, the culmination of her secret project combined with Marcus's insights. For the first time, she felt proud of who she was, of how she felt things so deeply. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "But will you be there with me?" Marcus placed his hand gently on her shoulder, a human gesture of support that she had come to appreciate. "Of course. You're not alone anymore, Lyra. And I think it's time the Artaxians learned what they'd been missing." As they prepared for the confrontation to come, neither of them realized they were about to challenge not just Lyra's father, but centuries of Artaxian tradition. The story of an emotional alien and a compassionate human was about to become something much bigger than either of them had imagined. The arrival of high scientist Ren aboard Harmony 7 caused quite a stir. His tall, imposing figure moved through the station's corridors with purpose, his violet skin maintaining a perfectly controlled, dim glow that marked him as a master of emotional suppression. Two other senior Artaxian scientists followed in his wake, their expressions equally neutral. Lyra stood waiting in the main research lab, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. Marcus stood slightly behind her, along with several other scientists who had become interested in their work. The data displays around them showed their findings in vivid detail, charts, graphs, and historical analyses that proved the value of emotional intelligence across species. "Daughter," Ren said as he entered, his tone carrying no warmth, "I see you continue to display your unfortunate tendencies." His eyes swept over the assembled group, lingering with disapproval on Marcus. "And you associate with lesser species." "Father," Lyra replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "Before you proceed with your plans, I ask that you review our research findings." "Research?" one of Ren's companions said with obvious disdain. "What could an emotional deviant possibly have discovered?" Marcus stepped forward. "Sir, your daughter has made a breakthrough in understanding interspecies development. Her emotional sensitivity allowed her to see patterns that others missed." Ren's eyes narrowed. "A human presuming to lecture me about scientific discovery? How typical of your primitive species." But Lyra was already bringing up the data displays. "Look at this, Father. Species that maintain their emotional capacity show a 47% higher rate of innovation in crisis situations. The Centaurians' greatest technological advances came during periods of intense cultural expression. Even our own history shows this pattern." She brought up another display. "And here, the mapping of emotional responses across different species shows remarkable similarities. It's not a weakness we evolved past, it's a crucial tool for understanding and advancement. These findings are significant," spoke up Dr. Vix, a respected Regellian researcher who had been following their work. "The implications for interspecies cooperation alone are groundbreaking." Ren's perfectly controlled expression flickered for just a moment. He moved closer to the displays, his scientific training warring with his cultural biases. "This data, it suggests that emotion and logic aren't enemies," Marcus said quietly. "They're two parts of the same whole. Your daughter isn't flawed, she's evolved." She represents what your species could become if you stopped fighting against your own nature. The lab fell silent as Ren studied the displays. His companions exchanged uncertain glances, their own carefully maintained emotional control slipping just enough to show their interest. Your research methodology is surprisingly thorough, Ren finally said, a hint of something like wonder creeping into his voice. The historical correlation patterns are particularly compelling. Lyra's skin brightened with hope. Then you understand why I can't undergo the modification? Why it would be wrong to suppress this part of myself. Ren turned to face his daughter, and for the first time in years she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like pride. I understand that I may have been incorrect in my assessment of your condition. He paused, struggling with words that went against centuries of Artaxian teaching. Perhaps our species' path toward emotional suppression needs to be reevaluated. High scientist, one of his companions protested. You cannot be suggesting. I am suggesting. Ren cut in, his own skin beginning to show the faintest increase in luminescence. That we have been blind to certain possibilities. My daughter's research will need to be verified, of course, but if these findings are accurate. He straightened up, decision made. The modification procedure is cancelled. News of what happened in the research lab spread quickly through Harmony 7. Within days, Lyra's research became the talk of the station. Other Artaxians began to approach her quietly, sharing their own struggles with emotional suppression. Some even showed subtle signs of increased bioluminescence, their careful control beginning to slip in the face of new possibilities. In her private lab, Lyra sat with Marcus, watching as messages poured in from across the galaxy. Scientific institutions wanted to review her findings. Cultural experts wanted to discuss the implications. And most surprisingly, young Artaxians were reaching out, asking about alternatives to emotional suppression. I never imagined this would happen, Lyra said, her skin glowing with a joy she no longer tried to hide. Father has approved a full research program. We're going to study emotional integration techniques from other species, find a way to help our people reconnect with their feelings safely. Marcus smiled, watching as she excitedly sorted through the messages. You've started a revolution, you know. A peaceful one, but a revolution nonetheless. We started it, she corrected him. I would have ended everything that night on the observation deck if you hadn't stopped me. If you hadn't shown me that emotions could be a strength. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ren. In the days since the confrontation, subtle changes had become visible in the high scientist. His skin occasionally flickered with increased luminescence, especially when engaged in scientific discussions. He was learning, slowly, to accept his own emotions. Daughter, he said, his voice carrying a warmth that would have been unthinkable a week ago. The Council has reviewed your findings. They've approved the establishment of a new research division, the Department of Emotional Integration Studies. They want you to lead it. Lyra's eyes widened. Me? But I'm just. You're exactly what our people need, Ren said firmly. Someone who understands both the scientific and emotional aspects of our nature. He turned to Marcus. And they've specifically requested human collaboration on the project. It seems your species' experience with emotional integration could be valuable to us. Marcus looked surprised but pleased. I'd be honored to help. Though I might need some technical training to keep up with your quantum scientists. Actually, Lyra said, her skin pulsing with nervous excitement, I was thinking we could expand the scope. Not just humans and Artaxians, but all species. Create a true interspecies emotional research center, here on Harmony 7. Ren nodded thoughtfully. The Council would approve. Our isolation has cost us more than we realized. It's time for that to change. As they discussed the details, more visitors arrived at the lab. Dr. Vix, the Rigelian researcher. The young Centaurian scientist who had first shown interest in their work. Even some of Ren's former hardline colleagues, their curiosity finally overcoming their prejudices. Look at them. Marcus whispered to Lyra. All these different species, coming together to talk about emotions and science. You've created something beautiful here. Lyra watched as the various beings engaged in animated discussion, their different forms of emotional expression creating a fascinating display. The Rigelians' antenna movements, the Centaurians' color changes, the subtle shifts in the other Artaxians' bioluminescence, all of it painting a picture of life lived fully, with both heart and mind engaged. We created it, she replied softly. Sometimes it takes an outsider to help you see yourself clearly. To show you that what you thought was a weakness was actually your greatest strength. 1 year later, the observation deck of Harmony 7 looked very different. What had once been a quiet spot for solitary contemplation was now home to the station's most popular gathering place, the Interspecies Emotional Research Center. Through its large windows, the same stars that had once witnessed Lyra's darkest moment now shone down on a place of hope and discovery. Inside, the center was alive with activity. Researchers from dozens of species worked together, studying the complex interplay between emotion and intelligence. In one corner, a group of young Artaxians practiced emotional expression exercises with a human instructor. Their skin glowed with varying intensities as they learned to embrace rather than suppress their feelings. Lyra stood in her office, looking out over it all. The quantum phase shifter that she had nearly used to end her life now sat in a display case on her wall, a reminder of how far she had come, and of the night that changed everything. Ready for the big presentation? Marcus asked, entering the office. He now served as the center's human liaison, helping bridge the gap between species that were just beginning to understand their emotions and those who had long embraced them. I think so, Lyra replied, her skin shimming with a mix of nervousness and excitement. I never thought I'd be presenting to the Galactic Science Council. Especially not about the benefits of emotional intelligence. You've earned it, Marcus said warmly. Your research has already helped thousands. Not just Artaxians, but beings from all over the galaxy who were taught to see their emotions as weaknesses. They walked together through the center, passing by various research stations. A Rigelian and an Artaxian were mapping neural responses to different emotional stimuli. A group of Centaurians were studying how art therapy could help species recover from emotional suppression. Even some of the most logic-focused races had begun sending observers. In the main conference room, Ren was waiting. He had become one of the center's strongest supporters, his own journey toward emotional integration serving as an inspiration to older Artaxians who struggled with change. His skin now regularly displayed subtle emotional patterns, and he had learned to smile, a gesture he had picked up from humans. The council is ready, he said, actually showing signs of pride as he looked at his daughter. And Lyra, I want you to know that your mother would have been proud. She always said our people had lost something important when we turned away from our emotions. She would have loved to see this. Lyra's eyes glistened with tears, something that no longer brought her shame. Thank you, Father. As she stepped onto the presentation platform, facing the holographic images of the council members, Lyra thought about her journey. From the desperate alien girl who had been ready to end it all, to the scientist who had helped reshape how entire species viewed emotional intelligence. None of it would have happened if a kind human hadn't taken the time to talk to her that night. Esteemed council members, she began, her voice strong and clear. 1 year ago, I stood at a crossroads. I believe that my emotional nature made me flawed, broken, unworthy of my place among my people. Today, I stand before you to present evidence that emotions are not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be embraced. A strength that, when combined with logic and reason, can lead to greater discoveries and deeper understanding than either could achieve alone. As she spoke, she saw Marcus smiling encouragingly from the back of the room. Her skin glowed brilliantly, and for once, she didn't try to dim it. She had learned that her light was meant to shine, that her differences were meant to make a difference. The stars outside continued their eternal dance, witnessing not an ending, but a beginning, a new chapter in the story of how a human's compassion and an alien's courage changed the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to feel, to think, and to be alive.